My wealthy daughter-in-law slapped me and shouted, "Stop acting like a beggar! You need to dress properly to impress my family." Everyone laughed. I just smiled and said, "You're right." But a week later, when I revealed my husband's inheritance, I did something she would never forget. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Lucille, and at 68 years old, I thought I had seen every possible way a person could be humiliated. I was wrong. The dinner party was supposed to be elegant. Selene, my daughter-in-law, had insisted on hosting it at our family home. Well, what used to feel like our family home before she and my son Marcus moved in 3 years ago. The dining room gleamed under the crystal chandelier that had belonged to my mother, now reflecting the faces of 12 guests I barely recognized. Selene's friends from her country club, her sister Victoria, and several couples whose last names sounded like they belonged on street signs in the wealthy part of town. I sat at the far end of the table, in what Selene had designated as my spot. Not the head of the table where I used to sit when Harold was alive, not even close to Marcus. I was positioned next to the kitchen door, like hired help waiting for instructions. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. They discussed their recent trips to Europe, their children's acceptances to Ivy League schools, their second homes in the Hamptons. I listened, occasionally nodding when someone glanced my way with that polite but distant smile people reserve for elderly relatives they tolerate rather than treasure. "Lucille, dear," Selene's voice cut through the chatter, sweet as poisoned honey. "Could you help me bring out the main course? These heels are just killing me tonight." I started to rise, but she placed a perfectly manicured hand on my shoulder, pressing me back down. "Actually, before you do that, I wanted to share something with everyone." Her smile widened, and I felt my stomach tighten. I knew that look. Harold used to get the same expression when he was about to tell an embarrassing story about someone at his office parties. "You all know Marcus's mother has been living with us since Harold passed," Selene began, her voice carrying that practiced tone she used when she wanted to sound concerned rather than cruel. "And we've been so patient, haven't we, honey?" She looked at Marcus, who was studying his wine glass as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Yes, darling," he mumbled without looking up. "But tonight, I think it's time we addressed something that's been bothering me for quite some time." Selene stood smoothing her black cocktail dress, the one that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in 3 months. "Lucille, sweetheart, I need to be honest with you in front of our friends." The table went silent. Even the soft jazz playing from the speakers seemed to quiet. I felt 12 pairs of eyes turn toward me, some curious, others already showing signs of discomfort. Victoria, Selene's sister, was practically vibrating with anticipation. "You've been living in this house for 3 years now," Selene continued, her voice growing stronger, more confident. "And in all that time, you haven't contributed a single dollar toward the mortgage, the utilities, or even your own food. You dress like—" She paused, letting her eyes travel from my simple navy cardigan to my sensible black shoes. "Well, like someone who shops at thrift stores." My cheeks burned. The cardigan was from a thrift store. So were the shoes. When Harold died, his medical bills had eaten through most of our savings, and his life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses. But I had never asked Marcus and Selene for money. I had been careful, quiet, grateful for the roof over my head. "Selene," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "No, Mother Lucille, let me finish." The way she said mother made it sound like a title she was forced to use rather than a term of endearment. "Our friends deserve to know the truth about our situation. They've been wondering why we can't join them on their trips, why we had to cancel our membership at the yacht club." This was news to me. I had no idea they had been struggling financially. Marcus worked at a successful law firm, and Selene had inherited money from her grandmother just 2 years ago. "The truth is," Selene's voice rose slightly, "we've been supporting a grown woman who contributes nothing to this household. Nothing." She laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Look at her, sitting there in her bargain clothes, eating food she didn't pay for, using electricity she doesn't contribute to." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could feel the heat rising up my neck. Mrs. Patterson, one of Selene's country club friends, was staring at her plate. Mr. Davidson cleared his throat uncomfortably, but Selene wasn't finished. "Stop acting like a beggar!" The words exploded from her mouth like bullets. "You have to dress well to please my family." And then it happened. Her hand moved so fast I barely saw it coming. The slap landed across my left cheek with a sound that seemed to echo through the dining room. The sting was immediate, sharp, but the shock was worse. In 68 years, no one had ever laid a hand on me in anger. The room erupted in nervous laughter. Not the kind of laughter that comes from joy, but the uncomfortable sound people make when they witness something awful and don't know how to respond. Victoria actually clapped her hands together like she was watching a performance. "Oh my God, Selene," someone whispered, but I couldn't tell who. I sat there, my hand slowly rising to touch my burning cheek, and looked around the table. These people, these supposed friends of my family, were laughing at me, at my humiliation, at my pain. Marcus finally looked up from his wine glass. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something flicker there. Shame, maybe, or regret. But he didn't speak. He didn't defend me. He just looked away again and took another sip of his wine. "That felt good," Selene said, flexing her fingers as if the slap had hurt her hand. "I've been wanting to do that for months." More laughter rippled around the table. I stood slowly, my legs shaking slightly. For a moment, I thought about running to my room, locking the door, and crying into the pillow Harold had slept on for 37 years. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way Selene was looking at me, with such satisfaction, such smug certainty that she had won something. Instead, I smiled. "You're absolutely right," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I have been acting inappropriately." Selene blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. "I should dress better. I should contribute more to this household." I looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes that had witnessed my humiliation. "Thank you for opening my eyes." I turned and walked toward the kitchen, my head held high, leaving behind the confused murmurs and whispered conversations. As I pushed through the swinging door, I heard Selene's voice, uncertain now. Well, that was easier than I expected, but she was wrong. Nothing about what came next would be easy. As I stood in the kitchen, my cheek still burning from her slap, I made a decision that would change everything. I walked to the small desk where Harold used to pay the household bills and pulled out a key I hadn't touched in 3 years. The key to Harold's study upstairs. The room Selene had been asking to convert into a walk-in closet. It was time to visit the attic. It was time to remember what Harold had really left behind. The next morning, I waited until Selene left for her Pilates class and Marcus departed for the office before I climbed the stairs to Harold's study. My fingers trembled as I inserted the old brass key into the lock. The door opened with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty house. Harold's study looked exactly as he had left it 3 years ago. Selene had been pushing to clear it out, claiming the space was wasted on a dead man's belongings, but I had insisted it remain untouched. Now I understood why some instinct had made me protect this room. The mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface still cluttered with Harold's reading glasses, a coffee mug that bore his initials, and stacks of financial magazines he would never finish reading. But it wasn't the desk I was interested in. It was what lay beneath the loose floorboard behind his leather armchair. Harold had shown me the hiding spot only once, during his final weeks when the cancer had made him paranoid about leaving me vulnerable. "If anything ever happens to me, Lucille," he had whispered, his voice already weakened by the treatments. "There are things you need to know. Things I kept from you to protect you from worry." I had dismissed it then as the ramblings of a man facing his mortality. Harold had always been dramatic about money, alternately worrying we didn't have enough and then reassuring me that we were comfortable. After his death, when the medical bills started arriving and I saw our modest savings account, I assumed I had understood our true financial situation. I was wrong. The floorboard came up easier than I expected, revealing a metal fireproof box I had never seen before. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, were documents that made my breath catch in my throat. Bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed. Investment portfolios managed by firms whose names I had never heard Harold mention. Property deeds for 2 rental buildings downtown that generated monthly income of $3,000 each. Stock certificates for companies that had grown substantially since Harold's death. But it was the final document that made me sink into Harold's chair with shock. A trust fund, established 15 years ago, with my name as the sole beneficiary. The current value, according to the most recent statement dated just 1 month before Harold's death, was $2.7 million. $2.7 million. I sat there for nearly an hour, reading and rereading the documents, trying to understand how I had been living like a charity case when I was actually wealthier than most of the people who had laughed at me the night before. Harold had protected these assets through careful legal planning, ensuring they couldn't be touched by his medical expenses or claimed by creditors after his death. A handwritten letter, in Harold's careful script, explained everything. My dearest Lucille, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've finally found what I tried so hard to keep safe for you. I never told you about these investments because I wanted you to live without the worry that money brings. You've always been too generous, too trusting. I was afraid you'd give it all away to anyone who asked, but I also hid it because I knew our son, Marcus, has always been weak when it comes to money, and I feared he would pressure you to help him beyond what was reasonable. This money is yours alone. Use it to live the life you deserve, free from anyone who would take advantage of your kind heart. The lawyer's information is in the envelope. He's been managing everything and waiting for you to contact him. Trust no one else with this information until you're ready. All my love, Harold. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling Harold's presence in the room as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. He had known. Somehow he had known that I would need this protection, this independence. A sound from downstairs made me quickly return the documents to their hiding place. Selene's voice carried up the stairs, talking loudly on her phone to someone about the mortifying scene from the night before. I know it was harsh, she was saying, but someone had to put her in her place. You should have seen how pathetic she looked. I think I finally got through to her, though. She actually thanked me for embarrassing her. I moved to the top of the stairs, listening as her voice grew clearer. Marcus feels guilty, of course, but he knows I'm right. We can't keep supporting his mother forever. The woman needs to learn some self-respect. Maybe now she'll finally realize she needs to contribute or find somewhere else to live. Find somewhere else to live. The words hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just humiliating me for sport. They were trying to force me out entirely. I heard her footsteps moving toward the kitchen, her voice fading as she continued her conversation. The trust fund from my grandmother is almost gone, and Marcus's salary barely covers our expenses. We need her Social Security money at minimum, but honestly, we need the whole house to ourselves if we're ever going to get back on our feet financially. My Social Security money. They wanted my $312 a month in Social Security benefits, while I sat on assets worth nearly $3 million. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. I crept back into Harold's study and locked the door behind me. My hands were steadier now as I pulled out the documents again. The lawyer's name was Jonathan Fitzgerald, and his office was downtown, just a few blocks from the bank where Harold and I had maintained our modest checking account for 30 years. I picked up Harold's old phone, a landline that Selene had been pestering me to disconnect, and dialed the number on Mr. Fitzgerald's business card. Fitzgerald and Associates, a pleasant female voice answered. Hello, this is Lucille Morrison. I believe you've been expecting my call. There was a pause, then excitement in the woman's voice. Mrs. Morrison, yes, Mr. Fitzgerald has been hoping to hear from you. He's been managing your husband's arrangements for 3 years now. Can you come in this afternoon? Yes, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I can be there at 2 o'clock. Perfect. And Mrs. Morrison? Mr. Fitzgerald asked me to tell you that you should bring identification and be prepared to access your accounts immediately if you choose to do so. After I hung up, I sat in Harold's chair and planned my afternoon. I would tell Selene I was going grocery shopping, something that would take several hours and wouldn't surprise her. I would meet with the lawyer, understand my options, and then decide how to handle the situation at home. For 3 years, I had lived quietly, gratefully, trying not to be a burden. I had accepted Selene's increasingly cruel comments, Marcus's growing distance, and the general atmosphere of being barely tolerated in my own home. But that was before I knew the truth. As I locked Harold's study and walked downstairs, I could hear Selene in the kitchen, still on the phone, describing my humiliation to another friend with obvious satisfaction. She was planning a shopping trip for new clothes to celebrate finally taking control of the household dynamics. I smiled as I reached for my purse and car keys. She had no idea what taking control actually looked like. Jonathan Fitzgerald was nothing like I had expected. Instead of the elderly, formal lawyer I had imagined, he was a man in his early 50s with kind eyes and a warm handshake that reminded me of Harold. His office overlooked the city center, and the walls were lined with photographs of families rather than the typical legal diplomas and awards. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, gesturing for me to sit in a comfortable leather chair across from his desk. "I've been waiting 3 years for this meeting. Harold spoke of you constantly during our planning sessions." He opened a thick file that bore my name in Harold's familiar handwriting. "I assume you found the documents he left for you." "Yes, but I still don't understand how this is possible. We lived so modestly. Harold never mentioned any of these investments or properties." Mr. Fitzgerald smiled. "Your husband was one of the most careful financial planners I've ever worked with. He started investing small amounts in his 20s, reinvesting all dividends, never touching the principal. When his father died and left him a modest inheritance, Harold used it to purchase the first rental property. Over 40 years, those careful decisions compounded into significant wealth." He pulled out a current statement that made my breath catch. "As of yesterday, your accessible assets total $3.1 million. The trust fund has grown by nearly $400,000 since Harold's death, thanks to a strong market and the rental income from your properties." $3.1 million. I had been worrying about my $312 Social Security check while sitting on a fortune that most people could only dream of. "Harold was very specific about his instructions," Mr. Fitzgerald continued. "He wanted you to have complete control over these assets, but he also wanted you to take time to grieve and adjust before making any major decisions. He hoped you would contact me when you felt ready to move forward with your life." "I'm ready now," I said, and meant it. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing every account, every investment, every piece of property. The rental buildings were managed by a property company that deposited $6,000 monthly into an account I never knew existed. The stock portfolio included shares in companies whose products I used every day, companies Harold had researched carefully and believed would grow over time. "What I'd like to do," I told Mr. Fitzgerald, "is transfer some funds to my personal checking account immediately. I want to make some purchases today." "Of course. How much would you like to transfer?" I thought about Selene's comment about my bargain clothes, about the way she had looked at me like I was something scraped off her shoe. $100,000 to start. Mr. Fitzgerald didn't even blink. "I'll have that transferred within the hour. Would you also like me to arrange for a credit card with a substantial limit? It might be more convenient for immediate purchases." By 4 o'clock, I was walking out of the bank with a new credit card, a checkbook for an account that held $100,000, and a sense of power I hadn't felt since Harold's death. But I wasn't ready to go home yet. I had shopping to do. My first stop was Nordstrom, where a personal shopper named Patricia took one look at my budget and immediately understood that this wasn't going to be an ordinary afternoon. I tried on dresses, suits, and casual wear that cost more than I used to spend on clothes in an entire year. Patricia had impeccable taste and an intuitive understanding of what would flatter a 68-year-old woman who wanted to look elegant rather than like she was trying to be young. "The navy silk dress is perfect for you," Patricia said as I examined myself in the 3-way mirror. "It's sophisticated but not stuffy. And with the right accessories, it could work for anything from a dinner party to a business meeting." The dress cost $800. I bought it along with matching shoes, a handbag, and jewelry that complemented the ensemble perfectly. I also purchased several other outfits, including a stunning black dress that made me feel like the confident woman I had been before Harold's illness consumed our lives. My next stop was the jewelry store where Harold had bought my engagement ring 41 years ago. The owner, Mr. Chen, remembered me and was delighted to help me select pieces that would complement my new wardrobe. I chose elegant pearl earrings, a simple but expensive watch, and a necklace that had caught my eye immediately. A delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant that sparkled like a captured star. But the most important purchase was my last one. I drove to the salon where Selene went for her weekly appointments, the exclusive establishment where she had often complained about the cost while simultaneously bragging about the results. "I'd like a complete makeover," I told the receptionist. "Hair, makeup, nails, everything." The stylist, a young woman named Madison who had probably styled Selene's hair dozens of times, worked magic with scissors and color. She took years off my appearance without making me look like I was desperately trying to recapture my youth. The subtle highlight she added brought out the natural silver in my hair, and the new cut framed my face in a way that emphasized my best features. As I sat in the makeup chair, watching the artist enhance my eyes and define my cheekbones, I thought about Harold. He would have loved seeing me pamper myself this way. He had always encouraged me to spend money on things that made me happy, but I had been too practical, too focused on saving for an uncertain future. Now I understood that the future was already secure, and it was time to live in the present. By 7 o'clock, I was driving home in my sensible Honda Civic, looking like a completely different person. The woman in my rearview mirror was elegant, confident, and clearly prosperous. She looked like someone who belonged at exclusive dinner parties, someone whose opinions mattered, someone who commanded respect. But I wasn't ready to reveal the new me just yet. I had learned too much about Selene and Marcus during my eavesdropping that morning. They were struggling financially, which explained the increasing pressure on me to contribute to household expenses. They saw me as a burden to be tolerated and eventually discarded. What they didn't know was that I had been listening to more than just Selene's phone conversations. Over the past few months, I had overheard arguments between her and Marcus about money, about debt, about the credit cards that were nearly maxed out, and the loan payments they were struggling to make. The irony was perfect. While they complained about my lack of financial contribution, they were drowning in debt. While they mocked my thrift store clothes, they were borrowing money to maintain their expensive lifestyle. While they planned to force me out of my own home, they needed my modest Social Security check just to make ends meet. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, looking at the house Harold and I had purchased 35 years ago. It was a beautiful home in a desirable neighborhood, and it had appreciated significantly in value over the decades. According to the property records Mr. Fitzgerald had shown me, it was now worth approximately $800,000. And according to Harold's will, which I had also reviewed that afternoon, the house belonged entirely to me. Marcus and Selene were living in my home, eating food purchased with my money, and planning to force me out so they could have more space. As I walked to the front door, carrying my shopping bags and feeling like royalty in my new clothes, I could hear voices from the kitchen. Selene was talking to someone, probably her sister Victoria, based on the tone of the conversation. "She actually seemed grateful when I put her in her place," Selene was saying. "I think the shock therapy worked. Marcus said she went out today, probably to look for a job or a cheap apartment. Either way, we'll finally have some space to breathe." I smiled as I quietly climbed the stairs to my bedroom. Let them think they had won. Let them believe their cruel plan was working. Tomorrow, I would begin to show them exactly how wrong they were. But tonight, I had one more thing to do. I needed to visit Harold's study again and make some phone calls. The rental properties needed to be evaluated, and I wanted to understand all of my options before I made my next move. Because this wasn't just about new clothes or a makeover, this was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my home. For the next 2 weeks, I played my role perfectly. I continued wearing my old clothes around the house, speaking quietly when spoken to, and keeping my new purchases hidden in my bedroom closet. To Selene and Marcus, I appeared to be the same defeated woman they had humiliated at that dinner party. But I was far from idle. During my daily grocery shopping trips, I met with contractors to evaluate renovation projects for my rental properties. I consulted with a financial advisor about expanding my investment portfolio. I even looked at several luxury condominiums downtown, just to understand my options if I decided to leave the family home permanently. Most importantly, I watched and listened. I learned that Marcus had borrowed $25,000 against his law firm's retirement account to cover Selene's credit card debt. I discovered that they were 3 months behind on their car payments for the BMW that Selene drove to her Pilates classes. I overheard phone conversations about consolidation loans and second mortgages. They were drowning financially, and they had no idea that their life preserver was sleeping in the bedroom down the hall. The opportunity I had been waiting for came on a Thursday evening. Selene announced that she was hosting another dinner party the following Saturday. "It's going to be even bigger than last time," she told Marcus over dinner, her voice bright with excitement. "I've invited the Hendersons, the Clarks, my entire book club, and some of the women from my yoga class. Nearly 20 people." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Selene, we can't afford another party like that. The catering alone will cost us." "I'm not hiring caterers," she interrupted. "I'm going to cook everything myself. It will be more personal, more authentic." She turned to look at me with that familiar calculating expression. "And of course, Mother Lucille will help with the preparation and serving. Won't you, dear?" I set down my fork and met her gaze. "Of course. Wonderful. I want this to be perfect." "I'm planning to announce some exciting news that evening." She glanced at Marcus, who suddenly looked even more uncomfortable. After dinner, I lingered in the kitchen, pretending to load the dishwasher while I listened to their conversation in the living room. "You haven't told her about the house yet," Marcus was saying, his voice strained. "I want to wait until after the party. Let me have this one perfect evening first." Selene's voice carried a note of desperation I hadn't heard before. "Once we explain that we need to sell the house to pay off our debts, she'll understand that she needs to find other arrangements." Sell the house. My house. The house Harold and I had lovingly maintained for 35 years. The house where I had raised Marcus, where Harold had died peacefully in our bedroom upstairs. They weren't just planning to force me out. They were planning to sell my home out from under me. "She doesn't have anywhere to go," Marcus said, and for a moment I heard an echo of the boy who used to come to me with scraped knees and bad dreams. "She has Social Security. There are senior housing complexes where she can afford a small apartment. She'll be fine." Selene's voice hardened. "Marcus, we don't have a choice. If we don't sell this house and use the equity to pay off our debts, we're going to lose everything. Your job, my car, our entire life." I finished loading the dishwasher and went upstairs to my room, my mind racing. They planned to sell my house, take the proceeds to pay their debts, and move me into some senior housing complex on my Social Security income. The audacity was breathtaking, but it also gave me the perfect opportunity. The next morning, while Selene was at her Pilates class, I called Mr. Fitzgerald. "I need to accelerate our timeline," I told him. "I want to make some significant changes before this weekend." "What did you have in mind?" "First, I want to transfer title of the house into a trust that gives me complete control. I want it legally impossible for anyone else to sell or mortgage the property without my explicit consent." "That's easily arranged. The house is already yours according to Harold's will, but we can create additional legal protections." "Second, I want to purchase a new car, something appropriate for a woman of means. I can have our automotive specialist help you with that." And finally, I paused, thinking about Selene's planned dinner party. "I want to make a rather dramatic purchase, something that will send a very clear message." By Friday afternoon, everything was in place. The house was legally secured in an irrevocable trust with me as the sole trustee. A beautiful silver Mercedes sedan sat in the driveway next to Marcus's Honda and Selene's BMW, paid for in cash, with my name on the title. But my most important purchase was scheduled for delivery Saturday morning, just hours before Selene's dinner party. I spent Friday evening helping Selene prepare for her event, playing the role of the dutiful, subdued mother-in-law. I chopped vegetables, set tables, and listened to her excited chatter about the perfect evening she had planned. "I want everything to be absolutely flawless," she said, arranging flowers in the dining room. "This party is going to change everything for us." She had no idea how right she was. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, which seemed appropriate for what I had planned. Selene was in full preparation mode, rushing between the kitchen and dining room, checking and rechecking every detail. At exactly 10 o'clock, the delivery truck arrived. "Mrs. Morrison?" the delivery man asked, consulting his clipboard. "We have a furniture delivery for you." Selene appeared at my shoulder, frowning. "Furniture? Mother Lucille, what did you order?" I smiled calmly. "Just a few things to make the house more comfortable." "Us?" What followed was the most satisfying hour I had experienced in 3 years. The delivery men brought in piece after piece of exquisite furniture. A new dining room set in rich mahogany that made our old table look shabby by comparison. A living room ensemble in soft leather that transformed the entire space. Art pieces and decorative accessories that elevated every room they touched. Each piece was more expensive than anything Selene and Marcus owned. Each delivery made Selene's mouth open a little wider with shock. "Where did you get the money for this?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saved up," I said simply, watching her face turn pale as the delivery men assembled a gorgeous entertainment center that had cost more than most people's cars. "Saved up? From what? Your Social Security?" I didn't answer. I just supervised the placement of each piece, making sure everything was perfect for the evening's festivities. Marcus arrived home just as the delivery truck was leaving. He stood in the driveway, staring at the new Mercedes, then at the empty truck, then at the house where he could see the new furniture through the windows. "Mom," he said when he found me in the living room, sitting in my new leather armchair like a queen on her throne. "What's going on?" "I decided it was time to make some improvements to the house," I said, gesturing around the transformed space. "Don't you think it looks better?" Selene appeared behind him, her face a mask of confusion and growing panic. "Marcus, she's bought thousands of dollars worth of furniture. Where could she possibly have gotten that kind of money? And the car," Marcus added weakly. "There's a new Mercedes in the driveway." I stood up slowly, smoothing my simple house dress, the last time I would ever dress down in my own home. "Why don't you both sit down? We should talk before your guests arrive." They sank onto the new sofa like children called to the principal's office. "I know you've been planning to sell the house," I said calmly. "I know you've been struggling with debt. I know you've been counting on forcing me into some senior housing complex so you can use the proceeds from this house to solve your financial problems." Selene's face went white. Marcus looked like he might be sick. "What you don't know," I continued, enjoying every second of their growing panic, "is that this house belongs to me, completely and irrevocably. You cannot sell it, mortgage it, or use it as collateral for anything, ever." "That's impossible," Selene whispered. "We live here. We pay the—" "You pay nothing," I interrupted. "I own this house outright. I own the Mercedes in the driveway. I own the furniture you're sitting on. And in about 6 hours, when your 20 guests arrive for dinner, I'm going to make sure everyone understands exactly how things work in this household." The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the first guest. It was time for the real party to begin. The transformation began at exactly 5:30, 1 hour before Selene's guests were scheduled to arrive. I excused myself to get ready, leaving Marcus and Selene sitting on their new furniture in stunned silence, still trying to process what I had just told them. In my bedroom, I opened the closet that had hidden my secret for 2 weeks. The navy silk dress Patricia had selected looked even more beautiful than I remembered. The fabric flowed like water, and the cut was perfection. Sophisticated, elegant, expensive. I added the pearl earrings, the diamond necklace, and the gold watch, each piece catching the light like small declarations of independence. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the timid, shabby woman who had been slapped at this very table 2 weeks ago. In her place stood someone who looked like she belonged in the society pages, someone whose opinion mattered, someone who commanded respect. I could hear voices downstairs. The first guests had arrived. Perfect timing. I descended the staircase slowly, savoring each step. The new chandelier I had installed that morning cast rainbow prisms across the walls, and the sound of my heels on the hardwood floors announced my presence like a drum roll. The conversation in the living room stopped abruptly as I appeared in the doorway. "Good evening," I said, my voice carrying the confidence that $3.1 million tends to provide. Mrs. Henderson, the first to arrive with her husband, was holding a glass of wine halfway to her lips, her mouth slightly open. "Lucille? Is that you?" "It is indeed." I smiled graciously and moved into the room, noting how the new furniture made the space feel both larger and more intimate. "I'm so glad you could join us this evening." Selene stood frozen by the bar cart, still wearing the same casual clothes she had been cooking in all day. Next to my elegant appearance, she looked like the hired help. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mom," Marcus started, his voice strained. "Maybe we should—" "Oh, please, Marcus. Don't let me interrupt the party." I settled into my new armchair, the leather sighing softly beneath me. Selene has worked so hard to make this evening special. More guests arrived in quick succession. Victoria, Selene's sister, stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me. The book club ladies, who had been at the infamous dinner party 2 weeks ago, exchanged confused glances. Within 30 minutes, the living room and dining room were full of people trying to reconcile the elegant woman before them with the shabby, submissive figure they remembered being humiliated in this very house. "Lucille, you look absolutely stunning," said Mrs. Patterson, one of Selene's country club friends. "That dress is exquisite. Is it new?" "Everything is new," I replied serenely. I decided it was time for some changes. Selene had managed to pull herself together enough to play hostess, but I could see the panic in her eyes every time someone complimented the furniture, the decorations, or my appearance. She kept shooting desperate glances at Marcus, who was drinking wine faster than was wise and avoiding eye contact with everyone. Dinner was announced at 7:30. As we moved to the dining room, the guests gasped appreciatively at the new mahogany table, the crystal stemware, and the elaborate place settings. Everything was perfect, from the fresh flowers to the fine china I had purchased that morning. I took my seat at the head of the table. Not at the side near the kitchen door where Selene had placed me before, but at the head, where Harold used to sit, where the hostess of the house belonged. "Selene, dear," I called sweetly, "would you mind serving the first course? You've worked so hard on the meal." She had no choice but to comply. As she moved around the table, serving the soup she had prepared, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Good. The conversation flowed around topics I had been excluded from before: travel plans, investment strategies, home renovations. But this time, when Mrs. Clark mentioned her recent kitchen remodel, I was ready. "How lovely," I said. "I'm considering some renovations myself. Nothing too dramatic, just updating the master suite and perhaps adding a conservatory off the back of the house." "Really?" Victoria leaned forward, interested despite herself. "That sounds expensive." "Not particularly," I replied, taking a delicate sip of wine. "When you own the house outright, these things become much more manageable." Selene's soup spoon clattered against her bowl. She recovered quickly, but not before several people noticed. "Own outright?" Mr. Henderson raised an eyebrow. "That's quite an accomplishment in this market." "Harold was very careful with our investments," I said, letting my gaze drift meaningfully toward Marcus and Selena. "He made sure I would never have to worry about housing or financial security." I could see the wheels turning in the guests' minds. When they had last seen me, I was dressed in thrift store clothes, being treated like a burden. Now I was clearly prosperous, elegant, and very much in control of my environment. During the main course, Victoria finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "Lucille, forgive me for being direct, but at Selene's last dinner party you seemed—" She paused, searching for diplomatic words. "I seemed poor," I finished for her, smiling. "I seemed dependent on Marcus and Selene's charity. I seemed like a burden they were graciously tolerating." The table went silent. Even the soft jazz playing from the new sound system seemed to quiet. That's exactly how I seemed, I continued, because that's exactly how they wanted me to seem. Selene's face had gone completely white. Mother Lucille, I think you've had enough wine. On the contrary, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years. I stood, my silk dress rustling softly, and moved to the sideboard where I had placed a leather portfolio earlier. You see, everyone, there's been a terrible misunderstanding about my circumstances. I opened the portfolio and pulled out the bank statements Mr. Fitzgerald had provided, along with property deeds and investment summaries. The truth is, I've never been financially dependent on anyone. These documents show assets totaling just over $3 million, not including this house, which I own free and clear. The gasps around the table were audible. Mrs. Patterson actually dropped her fork. $3 million? Victoria whispered, plus the rental properties downtown that generate $6,000 monthly in income. I added casually. Harold was quite the investor. I walked slowly around the table, letting selected guests glimpse the official documents. Bank letterheads, investment firm logos, property deeds with my name clearly visible. But here's the interesting part, I continued, returning to my seat. For 3 years, I've been living quietly in my own house, trying not to be a burden, while Marcus and Selene struggled with mounting debts, credit cards, car loans, personal loans. According to my information, they currently owe approximately $87,000 to various creditors. Marcus's wine glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. The red wine spread across the hardwood like blood. I listened to them plan to sell my house, this house, to pay their debts. I heard them discuss moving me into senior housing on my Social Security income while they used the proceeds from my property to save themselves from bankruptcy. The silence that followed was deafening. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at Marcus and Selene, who looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. But the most interesting part, I said, savoring this moment I had been planning for 2 weeks, was discovering that for months, they've been receiving monthly deposits of $1,000 from one of my accounts, money I authorized to help with household expenses, because I believed they were struggling to support an elderly dependent. Selene made a sound like a wounded animal. They weren't supporting me, I continued, my voice steady and clear. I was supporting them. While they complained about my contributions and humiliated me for being a burden, I was unknowingly subsidizing their lifestyle. Mrs. Clark found her voice first. You mean, when she said those things at the last dinner party. She was complaining about having to house and feed a woman who was paying for the privilege. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The same woman who owns the house they live in, the furniture they're sitting on, and who could solve their financial problems with a single check. Victoria turned to her sister with horror. Selene, please tell me this isn't true. But Selene couldn't speak. She was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. Marcus finally found his voice. Mom, I didn't know. About the money, about any of it. Dad never told me. Your father protected these assets for exactly this reason, I interrupted. He knew that knowledge of money changes people. He was right. I stood again, moving to the window that overlooked the garden Harold and I had planted together 30 years ago. For 3 years, I've lived like a guest in my own home. I've been slapped, insulted, and humiliated by people who owed their roof over their heads to my generosity. I've watched my own son remain silent while his wife treated me like garbage. When I turned back to the table, every face was focused on me with a mixture of awe and horror. So I've made some decisions, I announced. Effective immediately, the monthly assistance ends. The house is going into an irrevocable trust that ensures it can never be sold or mortgaged by anyone other than me. And Marcus and Selene have 30 days to find alternative living arrangements. The sound Selene made was somewhere between a scream and a sob. 30 days, I repeated firmly. That should be enough time to figure out how to support yourselves without my subsidies. I looked around the table at the shocked faces of Selene's friends and family. I do hope you'll excuse me, but I have some phone calls to make. My lawyer is expecting me to confirm the final details of the trust arrangement. As I walked toward the door, I paused next to Selene's chair. She was still sobbing, mascara running down her face in black streams. Oh, And Selene? I said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Thank you for the slap. It was exactly the wake-up call I needed. Then I left 20 stunned guests sitting at my table, in my house, contemplating the ruins of the life that Selene had built on lies and cruelty. The best part was yet to come. 3 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new penthouse apartment, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and rose. The view from the 20th floor was breathtaking. The river curved through downtown like a silver ribbon, and the hills beyond were just beginning to show hints of autumn color. The apartment was everything I had never dared to dream of. 2,000 square feet of luxury in the city's most prestigious building, with floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, and a gourmet kitchen I was still learning to use. The monthly rent of $4,000 was less than the interest I earned on my investments, making it essentially free. Behind me, I could hear my housekeeper, Maria, preparing breakfast. Not because I needed the help, but because I had discovered the joy of being served rather than serving. Maria was a lovely woman in her 50s who treated me with the respect and warmth I had been missing for years. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," she called from the kitchen. "Your coffee is ready, and I've prepared those blueberry scones you mentioned wanting to try." "Thank you, Maria. I'll be right in." I took one last look at the city below, marveling at how much my life had changed since that humiliating dinner party. The transformation hadn't been just about money, though the financial freedom was certainly liberating. It had been about reclaiming my dignity, my independence, and my sense of self-worth. The aftermath of my revelation that Saturday night had been both swift and satisfying. Most of the dinner guests had left within an hour, too shocked and uncomfortable to continue the evening. But not before several of them had cornered me privately to express their horror at how I had been treated and their admiration for how I had handled the situation. Mrs. Patterson had pulled me aside as she was leaving. "Lucille, I owe you an apology. We all do. What we witnessed at the last dinner party was unconscionable, and we should have spoken up. You weren't to know the full story," I had replied graciously. "Still, no one deserves to be treated that way, regardless of their financial circumstances. Selene and Marcus should be ashamed of themselves. They were." By Sunday morning, Marcus had appeared at my bedroom door, red-eyed and humble in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child caught in a lie. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea about Dad's investments, about the money you were giving us. I let Selene convince me that you were becoming a burden, and I was too much of a coward to stand up to her." For a moment, looking at my son's anguished face, I had felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct to comfort and forgive. But then I remembered 3 years of increasing disrespect. 3 years of being made to feel unwelcome in my own home. 3 years of watching him choose his wife's cruelty over his mother's dignity. "I know you're sorry, Marcus," I had said quietly, "but sorry doesn't undo 3 years of damage. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you sat silent while your wife slapped me at my own dinner table. I can make it right," he had pleaded. "We can go back to how things were before." "No," I had said firmly. "We can't. And more importantly, I don't want to." That conversation had sealed their fate. Within 2 weeks, Marcus and Selene had found a small rental house across town, taking only their personal belongings and leaving behind the furniture I had purchased. The house had felt enormous and peaceful once they were gone, but I hadn't stayed long myself. The memories were too heavy, and I found myself craving a fresh start in a place with no associations to either the happiness I had shared with Harold or the humiliation I had endured after his death. Selling the house had been surprisingly easy. The real estate market was strong, and the renovations I had made added significant value. The final sale price of $950,000 had pushed my net worth well over $4 million. More importantly, it had freed me from the past. I spent my days exactly as I pleased. Mornings often began with yoga classes at an upscale studio, where the other women were accomplished professionals and successful retirees, rather than country club wives with too much time and too little purpose. I had made genuine friends there, women who appreciated my intelligence and humor rather than judging me by my bank balance or family connections. Afternoons might include art gallery openings, lectures at the university, or simply reading in the building's beautiful rooftop garden. I had joined a book club filled with thoughtful, interesting women, and I was taking Italian lessons with the goal of traveling to Tuscany in the spring. The evenings were my favorite time. Sometimes I cooked elaborate meals just for myself, using the expensive ingredients I had never felt justified in buying before. Other times I dined at the city's finest restaurants, always well-dressed, always confident, always treated with the respect that comes from obvious prosperity and genuine self-assurance. I had had several dinner invitations from women I had met through various activities, and I was surprised to discover that I enjoyed entertaining in my new space. The penthouse was perfect for intimate gatherings, and I found myself becoming the kind of hostess I had always admired: gracious, interesting, and completely comfortable in my own skin. The phone rang, interrupting my morning reverie. I glanced at the caller ID and smiled. It was Jonathan Fitzgerald, calling with his weekly update on my investments. "Good morning, Jonathan." "Good morning, Lucille. I have some excellent news about your portfolio performance this quarter." As he detailed the latest growth in my assets, I marveled again at how different these conversations were from my old life. Instead of worrying about stretching my Social Security check to cover basic expenses, I was discussing dividend reinvestment strategies and tax-advantaged charitable giving. "There's one other matter," Jonathan said after we had finished the financial review. "I received a call yesterday from Marcus. He's apparently in some legal trouble related to his debts and was hoping, he was hoping you might be willing to help." I wasn't surprised. Through mutual acquaintances, I had heard that Marcus and Selene's financial situation had deteriorated rapidly after losing my monthly support and having to pay rent on their new place. Selene had been forced to take a job at a department store, a reality that had apparently shattered her self-image as a lady of leisure. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "That I would pass along his message, but that any decisions about assistance would be entirely yours." I looked out at the city, thinking about the son who had once been the center of my world, and the choices that had led us to this point. I felt a familiar pang of sadness, but no guilt. I had given Marcus 37 years of unconditional love and support, and he had repaid that with 3 years of allowing me to be treated like unwanted baggage in my own home. "Please tell Marcus that I wish him well, but that he needs to solve his own problems. I've learned that helping people who don't respect you only enables them to continue their disrespectful behavior. I'll convey that message," Jonathan said diplomatically. After I hung up, I sat with my coffee and scones, thinking about the strange turns life can take. A year ago, I had been a sad, shabby old woman, grateful for any scraps of attention from a family that saw me as a burden. Today, I was a confident, prosperous woman with a full social calendar and unlimited possibilities ahead of me. The transformation hadn't been about revenge, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction I had felt watching Selene's carefully constructed world crumble that Saturday night. It had been about recognizing my own worth and refusing to accept less than I deserved. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Patricia, my personal shopper, asking if I wanted to preview the new fall collection that had just arrived at Nordstrom. I smiled and typed back that I would be there at 2 o'clock. Then I received another message, this one from Elena, a woman I had met at yoga class who had become a close friend. She was inviting me to join her and several other women for dinner at a new Italian restaurant downtown. The chef was supposedly amazing, and Elena thought I would enjoy both the food and the company. I accepted immediately. These were the kinds of invitations I received now, from people who genuinely enjoyed my company, who saw me as an asset to their social circle rather than a charity case to be tolerated. As I prepared for my day, choosing from a closet full of beautiful clothes, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was elegant, confident, and radiantly happy. She bore little resemblance to the dowdy, defeated person who had been slapped at a dinner table 3 months ago. That woman had been afraid of being alone, afraid of being a burden, afraid of taking up too much space in the world. This woman feared nothing because she had learned the most important lesson of all. She was enough, exactly as she was, with or without anyone else's approval. The doorbell rang, and Maria called out that my driver had arrived. I had hired a car service for the days when I didn't want to deal with city traffic, another small luxury that made life more pleasant. As I gathered my purse and headed for the door, I felt a rush of excitement about the day ahead. Shopping for beautiful clothes, lunch at my favorite cafe, dinner with interesting women who valued my friendship. This was what Harold had wanted for me when he carefully preserved those assets. This was the life he had envisioned when he wrote that letter telling me to live free from anyone who would take advantage of my kind heart. I was finally doing exactly that, and it was more wonderful than I had ever imagined. The elevator descended smoothly toward the lobby, carrying me toward another day of the rich, full life I had built from the ashes of my humiliation. And as the doors opened onto the marble-floored lobby with its crystal chandeliers and fresh flowers, I smiled. At 68 years old, I was finally living like the queen I had always been, even when no one else could see my crown. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.